Marinero, and it is the Sick Podcast. Another game, another loss for the Montreal Canadiens, who returned home after a very, very long road trip that I think was about 7 games long. And the Canadiens hosted the Anaheim Ducks, who were playing their third game in 4 nights, travel included. Several nights ago, they were in Boston. Then they had a night off. They went to Toronto. Last night, they were in Toronto. They lost versus the Leafs. And then tonight, 3 games in 4 nights. And the Anaheim Ducks beat the Montreal Canadiens by a score of 5-4. The difference in the game, it was a bad outing by Caden Primo, who faced 9 shots, and he gave up 3 goals. 1 to Carrick, 1 to Fowler, and 1 to Terry. The Fowler and Terry goals were on the power play, but there's a couple of goals there in period number 1 that Caden Primo should have had, and unfortunately for Primo, he was pulled for the 4th time in 7 games. 4th time in 7 games. The Canadiens are really starting to upset me now, okay? They are screwing with players' development. What's happening to Primo happened to Caulfield. What happened to Caulfield is now happening to Primo. Can you please stop? Both of them belong in Laval. For a while, the Canadiens were decimated. They were depleted. They had injuries. They had COVID protocols, this, that, and all that stuff, and we kind of understood it. I don't care anymore. Find players if you don't have them in Laval. Find them somewhere else. Sign them somewhere else. Caulfield and Primo should finish the year in the American Hockey League. That's it. That's all. It's out of the way. All right, okay. Also want to mention that Samuel Montembeault comes in after period number 1. Jake Evans put on a little bit of a show. He looked really good on a line with Josh Anderson and Rem the Gem Pitlick. That's right. It's me, Tony Marinero, who's giving him the name Rem the Gem, because Evans scored 2 beautiful goals on 2 beautiful plays and passes by Rem Pitlick. But this game, everyone's talking about Trevor Zegras, 2019 9th pick overall in the draft. And he, Jack Hughes, who was picked first, and Mort Seider of Detroit, who I think was picked 6th, if memory serves me well. Anyway, those so far are the 3 best players from that draft. But Zegras has done this before, and he did it again. The lacrosse goal, he had everyone watching saying, did he just do that? He did that. He had a couple of goals on the night. Anyway, long story short, the Canadiens lose again. They outshoot Anaheim 40-24. Their goaltending, especially Caden Primo, lets them down. And Trevor Zegras, the player with the most talent in this game, was the best player in the game. We got that out of the way. For me, that's not what we're going to talk about tonight here on the Sick Podcast, brought to you by and presented by Cherry River Hard Seltzer. Only 90 calories, natural flavors, no preservatives, now available in Quebec grocery stores and at the beer store as well. Look how good it is. There's none left because I just finished it. All right, okay. What I want to talk about tonight is I want to talk about Kent Hughes and I want to talk about Jeff Gordon. Why? Because they're still going through their rounds of the media, and both had a chance to speak today. Kent Hughes was on radio on a couple of occasions. He spoke with LP Guy and Gilbert Delorme, and what did he tell them? He told them that he would be speaking to Carey Price today, a meet and a chat with Carey Price, and he would be speaking to Shea Weber. We'll get to that in just a minute. He also had a chance to speak with Paul Arcand and Alain Crête, and when they asked him, will you buy out Carey Price? Thought about it, and he said, a buyout? No, probably not a buyout. And if you take a look at the buyout numbers, it does not make sense. So what makes sense? LTIR or a 2-way trade where you get a huge salary in return as well, but maybe with less term, or a 3-way trade where team 1, the Canadiens, absorb maybe half the salary, team 2 absorbs another chunk, and team 3 doesn't have to pay a lot of salary for the years remaining on the contract. Jeff Gordon also spoke, and he spoke with Jonathan Bernier of Le Journal de Montréal. And what did he tell him? He told him that he's open to the word rebuild. And under the previous management team and the previous administration, you never heard the word rebuild. It was almost like it was taboo. You didn't hear about it. They didn't believe in it, whatever. It's almost like it was not an option. Forget about it. The only person you heard it from was yours truly, Tony Marinaro, who's been telling you since 2009 that the way was a rebuild, and I would have did the rebuild back in 2012 when the Canadiens had the 3rd pick overall, but they wanted to patch it, make it better right away. And then the Kotkaniemi year I thought was another appropriate year for the rebuild, but then they wanted to patch it again and make it better right away again. And they did make it to the Stanley Cup final. And if they would have won the cup, they would have been right and I would have been wrong. But they didn't win the cup, so logic prevails, and I'm right. Thank you very much. He's open to rebuild. And he said so many things to Jonathan Bernier that I thought, you know what, we need to talk about it. He might have to make many changes. And if he does, the rebuild could be the best way to move forward. For him to talk about that and say what he said, it leads me to believe, folks, that they are going the way of the rebuild. They might not say it, that it's a rebuild. And the reason why they might not say it's a rebuild is because a rebuild is usually associated with a 5-year term, for example, or a 5-year plan. Things can change. They end up making a blockbuster move, or they end up making a trade. One of the players they acquire in a trade ends up being a star. They sign a star free agent. They end up drafting some stars. They end up winning some lotteries. And all of a sudden, the whole thing gets accelerated. It's a sick podcast. sportbuffshop.com, pardon me, for all of your officially licensed sports apparel and our sick merchandise. Look at me, huh? Isn't this a beauty? It's going to be all right for Shane Wright, who's been playing better over the past couple of games. And our sick merchandise, use code SICK15 for 15% off on all of their items. All right. He also talked about the fact that, think about this, okay? He talked about the fact that he's open to a rebuild. He talked about the fact that he might have to change or make many changes, and at that point, the rebuild would be the best way to move forward. He also talked about the fact that there's many good teams in the East right now, and there's others that are progressing. So, does he think by patching it up, he could be better than those good teams in the East right now, or those that are progressing? Obviously not, because he added, so if we rebuild, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time to be able to be better than those teams that are better right now and better than the teams that are progressing. He also went on to say something that for me is music to my ears. And I've been saying this for a while. I want to see a star in Montreal. We saw flashes of stardom from PK Subban. We saw flashes of stardom from Alexei Kovalev. But that's too few and far between. I want to see what the folks in Colorado are seeing when Nathan McKinnon does his thing and Cale Makar does his thing. I want to see what the fans in Pittsburgh saw with Malkin doing his thing. And I don't want to, say Ovechkin, Crosby, and McDavid because they're generational players, but you can add them, of course, to the list because Connor Bedard could be a generational player. Zvichkov could be a generational player. They're slated to go 1 and 2 in the 2023 draft. So what do you want to do? You want to just have one draft, hope you hit, and then make the team better and then not draft in a good position in 2023? Doesn't make sense. For you to rebuild something properly, you need to be near the bottom. You need to have a top 6 or 7 pick 3 years in a row at least. You need to really hit on 2 of those players, and that's how you move forward, because we know that in Montreal, attracting free agents, as much as Kent Hughes will know everything to say, and as much as the Canadiens will be better equipped to tackle free agency with a guy who's been on the other end with his clients for the last 20 years. He's been at the free agency table. He's been fielding calls. He's been getting calls. All kinds of teams have been trying to recruit some of his clients. And he knows exactly what players want to hear. He knows exactly what their families want to hear. He knows exactly what will attract them to a team and to a city. So they're going to be better equipped. But at the end of the day, it's still the same Montreal, where there's a lot of media. There's a lot of media pressure. There's a lot of fan pressure. There are a lot of expectations. Even though it's not the only sport in town, it pretty much is the only sport in town. There's our roads. There's traffic. There's the language situation. There's a political situation. And based on the last 2 years, there's been curfews and this and that and all kinds of restrictions. But anyway, they still are better equipped. But what he said was, you need elite players in this league to win. And you have to find a way to get them. You have to find a way to sign them. And he can pull off a couple of trades the way he did with the Rangers. Because, of course, with the Rangers, he acquired Zibanejad, their number one centerman, by trade. He acquired Strome, their number two centerman, by trade. And also acquired Adam Fox. He made several trades to make them better. But he also said the majority of the elite players that they are going to have to acquire are going to have to come from the draft. I need you to think about this for a second. Yes, it's true that Trevor Zegras was drafted 9th, and it's true that the Patrice Bergerons of this world were drafted 45th, and it's true that you can find steals in the 2nd round, in the 3rd round, the 4th round, and even in the 5th round, and even in the 6th and 7th round. But for the most part, the better players in the history of this league were drafted as top 4 picks. That's where they were. I talked about Crosby. I talked about Malkin. I talked about Ovechkin. Let's talk about Patrick Kane. Let's talk about Austin Matthews. Let's talk about Mitch Marner. Let's talk about Nathan McKinnon. Let's talk about Cale Makar. Let's talk about Sasha Barkov. I mean, we can play this game till tomorrow. Let's talk about John Tavares. Let's talk about Victor Hedman. Let's talk about Connor McDavid. Let's talk about Leon Draisaitl. We can do this over and over and over again. The majority of the best players in this league are drafted 1, 2, 3, 4. For Jeff Gordon to say that the majority of the elite players the Canadiens are going to acquire are going to have to be at the draft, do you think that he wants to patch this thing to make it better right away so they end up getting the 10th pick one year and the 15th pick the next year? No. The way he wants to do it, in an ideal world, you would think that the Canadiens are going to have a top 5 pick in 2022, maybe even better, a top 3 pick in 2022, a top 5 pick in 2023, a top 8 pick in 2024, and slowly but surely, they're going to build this thing one step at a time. They are going to rebuild. There's no doubt in my mind. Marinaro, I'm in a good mood, even though the Canadiens lost, because I like what Jeff Gordon said. I like what Kent Hughes said. And the reason why I like what Kent Hughes said is because now we know how it's going to go down with Carey Price. Listen, Jeff Gordon talked about a rebuild. Kent Hughes doesn't have to tell us what he's going to do with Carey Price. If Jeff Gordon wants to go with a rebuild, Carey Price is not going to be here much longer. But we know it's not going to be a buyout. So it's either going to be a trade or it's going to be an LTIR. Anyway, you know what I do when I feel good about myself? I pull out my Manscaped. That's what I do. I pull out my Manscaped. Look at it. What a beauty, huh? This is, by the way, version 4.0, which they call the lawnmower. I used to have model 3.0, which I thought was great, until I got 4.0, and 4.0 is even better. It cuts even better. It charges even better. This thing is an absolute beauty. Look at this, huh? Look at this. Huh? I don't like hair, by the way, except for the hair that's on my head, as you can see, with my beautiful curls. So what do? I shave my arms. I take the hair off my hands. Look, huh? Look at this. Try and spot a hair. You won't. It's Manscaped. Manscaped.com. Use code SICK20, by the way, if you want 20% off. In my world, this baby here, the Manscaped Lawnmower version 4.0, this is a necessity. I need this in my house the way I need water, the way I need Cherry River, the way I need light, the way I need everything. The Montreal Canadiens are going to rebuild. Folks, they didn't say it, but they said it. And I've been telling everyone that I'm a step ahead of them. I've been telling everyone that I'm ahead of the game. You see, now I can finally say, even though I've been saying it since 2009 and it never happened, I told you so. And by the way, yes, there's going to be some short-term pain for some long-term gain, and maybe even some short-term pain for some long-term shame. In the meantime, don't worry, Marinaro telling you that it's going to be all right. Canadians lose 5-4 to Anaheim, but it's okay. We are going to rebuild. Go, Habs, go. Hold on a second. Blah, blah, rouge. It's Marinaro, the Sick Podcast. Make sure to tell all your friends about this podcast. No one talks Montreal Canadiens better than us. A podcast that is often imitated, never duplicated. I'm Marinaro. Follow us on Facebook at The Sick Podcast, on Instagram at the Sick Podcast, on Twitter at The Sick Podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It is absolutely free, and you'll get notified if you click on the notifications on all social media channels every time we go live. I'm Marinaro. This podcast is sick. Until next time, salute. Chin chin.